again, everyone. It's good to have you with us for this event. It figures to be an exceptional one that doesn't need any build-up.
Are you ready?
Don't ever give up.
Athletes, take your mark, get set. It's time for the Addict to Athlete podcast. Everybody out there, Coach Blu Robinson here. Hey, I want to thank you all so much for downloading, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. Man, greatly appreciate you guys doing so. Thanks so much for jumping on and leaving us a review. It helps us get this podcast out a little bit further and into the ears of those who might need a little bit of extra support, maybe some encouragement or a little push to get that sobriety going. Hey, as always, check out the website, addicttoathlete.org. You're going to find all of our information, backlog podcasts, information on recovery resources. Hey, shoot, even our team registration to jump on and join us for the 2023 Proxy Run 5K that's happening this September for Recovery Month. Jump on, registration's open. We'd love to have you guys come and be a part of that. It's a beautiful course, going to be a beautiful setting, and it's an opportunity to really understand how movement equals healing. Athletes, I got a great guest on today that should have been on here 5 years ago when we started this podcast. But, I think all things kind of simmer and wait. They get better with time. And I think this guest is no different than that. This is Charlie Engel. Charlie, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. You are a huge inspiration to Team Addict Athlete that I want to jump into. But would you mind opening this podcast by sharing a little bit about you, about kind of some of your journey, and really kind of how you've also turned that mess of addiction into the message of healing by just being out there, getting out there, running, exercising, advocating. I think you're a titan in that ultra running world and recovery based programming. So welcome to the podcast, brother. And it's about time, don't you think?
It is about time. We've tried and that's what happens when you get addicts trying to figure things out. And
Yes.
there's a lot of near misses, but thanks for having me on. And as you say too, the right time is the time when it happens, and that's now. So, I don't second guess the universe where that's concerned. And very grateful for what you do and for you having me on. And look, my story is, as I like to say, even for addicts, it's possible I've had a few more highs and a few more lows than most people, but it is, I think, the general nature of all of us that we are seekers. And I spent a long time early in my recovery, and I'll take a little further step back in a sec, but I spent a long time in recovery those first few years trying to rid myself of my addict. I thought that guy was trying to kill me.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to kill him in those first few years. So if I could have taken a scalpel and cut that part of my personality out, I would have done it.
Yes.
Those 3 years taught me that the addict and my obsessive nature, it's all the best parts of me. It's what makes me who I am. It's what makes me good at things. It's what makes me determined to, fight my way up the hill and get over the top. And it's all the best part. So I didn't need to get rid of it. I just needed to treat it like a superpower and point those energies towards things that are positive. And I got into, look, man, I went to college as a 17-year-old freshman at University of North Carolina. I thought I was, hot shit. And, when I got there and there were 4,000 other freshmen that had the exact same resume that I did.
Oh.
And, and I got lost. And in 1980, I'm old enough, I'm 60 years old. And in 1980, when I went to college, the drinking age was 18 in North Carolina. So I figured out in about a minute that I had found my path.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I could drink more than anybody else. It's not something to aspire to, but that was just the case. And, and consequently, the 80s, or as I call them, the cocaine decade,
Yes.
kicked my ass. And I spent 10 years, flunked out of college, spent 10 years always being the top salesperson. I would get a good job. I would be the best sales guy because we're addicts, man.
Yeah.
Addicts are the best salespeople in the world.
Hear, hear.
No one can convince another human being of something better than we can because we've spent years honing that skill. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop drinking. I couldn't stop doing coke. And every good thing that would happen, I would end up, killing it.
Yeah.
And moving on to the next city. So, I did it for 10 years, and I got married, and I bought a house, and I got cars, and I did all the things to try to like say, oh, addicts can't do these things, right?
Yeah.
Surely I can't be an addict. And finally, the birth of my son, my first son, when I was 29, it was the catalyst. I thought that he just being born and alive on this planet would stop me, like because
Most people do. Hmm.
yeah, being a decent human being or whatever I wanted to think of myself, surely I could stop for him. And of
Yes.
course it doesn't work that way.
No.
And so 2 months later I'm in the hood smoking crack and drinking and got the police involved, and
Mm.
I'm watching them search my car and pull out a crack pipe, and I realized in that moment, something that I knew, but this was the point where it really hit home, and it was just this simple idea that nobody was coming to save me.
Yep. The
Until
troops
I
weren't
made lots
coming. Yeah, the troops weren't
lots of
coming.
people were right. Lots of people were willing to help me,
Yeah.
but nobody was coming to save me until I took that first step to just say, okay, I'm done with trying to manage this myself. I need help. Let's go down this path and see what happens.
Mm.
And I went to a meeting that night, that literally that very night, July 23rd, 1992. I went to an AA meeting, and I've been to a lot of meetings, dude.
I'll
And
bet.
up to that point, but I'd always been there to get somebody off my back. Or in
Yeah.
the early days, I didn't even understand what was going on. Like I went to AA meetings because I wanted to manage my drinking because it was really screwing up my drug use.
Mhm.
And like,
Oh,
I mean,
man.
that's how I looked at it. And,
Brilliant.
for the first time I went with an open heart and a curious mind, and I put on my running shoes the next morning,
Hmm.
and I went for a short run, and I committed myself to doing those two things, going to a meeting and going for a run every day for 30 days.
Hmm.
And I just wanted to see what would happen. At the end of 30 days, my life had gotten significantly better. And I said, okay, let's go for 90 days. And so for 90 days, I went to a meeting, I went for a run every day. Well, ultimately, I did 3 years where
Wow.
I did not miss a day of going to a meeting, and I did not miss a day of running. And I ran like 35 marathons in that period of
Oh my
time. And
gosh.
because obviously I had that whole addiction thing under control.
Right. Makes sense.
And but my life got a lot better, and then that opened up the world to me, and I just sort of said, okay, let's running helped save my life, and then it kind of gave me a life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I'm curious though. What really compelled you to wake up that next day, look over at your shoes and be like, "I should put those on and go." I mean, did you have a history of like, athletics, that kind of stuff? I mean,
I
because
did.
most people won't do that. They'll put on those shoes and they'll be like, "Well, now I'll just, sit here." But like, what was it that like made you decide to go out for a run? Do you even remember like I've got to move? Because I'm a firm believer that
Yeah,
movement equals healing. I mean, I've seen it now for
totally.
20 years. But, like, I love that first kind of pivot where you're like, "I'm moving. I'm not gonna sit here. I can't
Yeah.
stay in this box of a house. I gotta go." You remember?
Yeah, well, even when I was a little kid, there was, growing up in the country. I'm actually right here in Durham, North Carolina. Again, my life has
Beautiful.
kind of come full circle, and running around in the woods, here as a little boy, hippie little boy. My mom was a college student for the first 10 years of my life. I mean, she was only 18 when I was born. And so I just remember the freedom and joy that I got from running in those early days. But I was running like any kid runs,
Mhm.
and I always make the joke that, we all love to run when we're kids, and then some middle school teacher uses running as a punishment
Yeah.
when we're 12 years old, and all of a sudden we hate running.
Yeah.
And for me, I ran in high school, and I actually ran at a very high level in high school, but it was the years of addiction, because I was a big binger, so I'd
Right.
go a week, a month, 6 months of just like down in the abyss, and then I would emerge and say, okay, I'm never doing that again. And I would always use
Classic.
running as part of my toolbox,
Mm-hmm.
to get myself, because I found for me, I could get fit again quickly. There was also, look, man, there's a little bit of self-punishment built in there too.
Absolutely.
I still felt like a piece of crap. I still do some days.
Mm-hmm.
And so running is a way where I can sort of tap into that, like make myself hurt just a little bit too. And part of it because I felt like I deserved it. Another part of it is that I recognize that, through some self imposed suffering, I can learn how to overcome other things in my life.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about that later. But I mean, so running was a part of my life. And it was a thing that I knew I didn't need anybody else to do. I needed almost no equipment. All
Yes.
I needed was the will and the commitment to say, I think my life depends on this. Going to a meeting and going for a run. And I'll be honest with you, some AA, diehards don't like it when I say this, but
Yeah.
like there's great value in 12-step recovery, and it played a great role
Mm-hmm.
in help saving my life and making me who I am. I would not have made it with AA alone.
I hear you.
I needed not only a physical outlet, I needed to not just be, and again, excuse me if there's anybody
No,
listening to
you're fine.
this, whatever, like, look, man, the AA meetings I was going to certainly back in the early days, and I still go to them today, but back in the early days, half the meeting standing outside smoking cigarettes before the meeting.
Yeah.
The other half is eating all the donuts and the cookies at the table. And I'm like, all right, maybe if you're in your first year of recovery, that's cool. But when you get to year 5 or 10 and you're not even bothering to look at the other ways that you can improve your life, I got to be honest, that's not for me.
Yeah.
That's not for you. You go do your thing. I no judge. Well, maybe I am being kind of judgy,
That's
but
okay. Yeah, I hear you.
but the fact is, I knew that for me, I needed to surround myself with people like you that believe in the power of physical movement
Mm-hmm.
to heal not just the body, but the mind and the spirit.
Absolutely, Charlie. And that's why I love. That's why Addict to Athlete started. Was in my little corner here in Utah. That's all we had was 12 steps, and they worked great, but they didn't work for everyone, and it didn't really work for me. I love the principles. I think they are guaranteed to work if you work them authentically. But it's one part of a greater whole in my mind. And so as we started kind of gathering like some ideas, and maybe this is a perfect pivot point to explain to you why you play such a crucial role into this. Um, it was your running across the Sierra. It was when you did the documentary of you guys running across the Sahara Desert. And you gave a little bit of a background in there, and I'm like, what in the world? And so I had used running as a form for me to get recoveries in 2000 with my, well, actually 96, started mountain biking, started doing some stuff, started running when I met Jerem and married his sister, got into the Thurston family. They're all a bunch of athletes. And um, I started running with these guys and we started talking. I started realizing that there's something that happens with movement as I'm getting my clients like getting ready to start this thing. We showed your documentary. Jerem came over to my meeting group. I was working as a therapist for the county government program, and I'm like, we talked a little bit about this because I'd had some of my athletes or my clients back then forging their sign off sheets for their 12 step meetings, and I caught them. What are you guys
Yeah.
doing, right? And they're like, Blue, it doesn't work for us all the time. And I have work, I have treatment, I have court, I have PO, I have all this stuff. And then I got to go out and do these meetings. And it kind of hit me. I'm like, yeah, I'm prepping all these guys to be family, like oriented again and get them healing, but they're never with their families. And I told Jeremy, I've been kind of flirting with this idea. I'm like, you know what? It works so well for me, this athletic part, like moving from an addict to an athlete. I don't have to call myself an addict anymore. I can call myself a runner now. And
Mm.
he's like, I have a movie you need to watch. And he brought it over and I grabbed my whole group and we watched your movie. And I'd never seen it, Charlie. That resonated with me so deep because I thought, who in the bloody hell it would be crazy enough to run across the Sahara Desert? But. And what I noticed is that it was the people you brought with you too. It wasn't just the solo thing. It was like you guys were talking about things. And I can only imagine, and I want to get into this, I can only imagine what you guys discussed, what you guys saw. You're in the middle of nowhere and there's this kid. Like, what? Like that resonated
Yeah.
with me. And we paused on that part, Charlie, and we had a 3-hour group on that little boy out there in the
Yeah.
middle of nowhere and you guys having to leave. Like, and I said, how's that feel like addiction? And I have studied that documentary inside and out because it resonates, man. And so when I said, who wants to try this, hands shot up and they're like, we want to do this. And these people, right, that were heroin addicts, alcoholics, they're like, we want to do this. So your exploration of using movement as healing from that documentary, you allowed, first of all, the anonymity to just, you know,
Yeah.
here I am. No one did
Yeah.
that, Charlie. No one's like, yeah, I've struggled
Yeah.
with this stuff. You know that. No one talked about it. And so here we are, like having all these tools inside of us, but no one shares that. I think you are a pioneer in it, man. And so it was because of that documentary and that little bit of a push, the Addict to Athlete's ball started to get rolling. So if you don't mind, man, tell me a little bit about that because I've been blown away here since the moment Jaron brought that to where we could watch it until today when I'm talking to you, the man who did it. So tell me a little bit about that.
Wow. Well, dude, first of all, thank you. That is, I can't tell you how meaningful that is for me. It almost, brings tears to my eyes. I mean, it certainly makes me emotional. I mean, it's it's been a while, so
Yeah.
I tend to compartmentalize it as just this thing that I did back then. And while I still talk about it, I tend to talk about, the numbers, the how far we ran, how we did this and we did that and whatever. And
Yeah.
I sort of, I forgot some of the deep, personal, parts of it.
Yeah.
And to I will say this, I learned early on, I had a problem early on in AA with the anonymity piece because, and again, people can, if you write to me, make it nice. But like I,
You've got listeners
my,
that agree with you. Just so you know, the Addict to Athlete listeners agree with what you're
yeah,
talking
good.
about.
All right.
Mhm.
I mean, look, because I get it. 85 years ago or whatever, when an AA was created, and there were 100 members, if one person announced that they were sober and then they went off the handle and got drunk and naked in Times Square and everybody knew it, then people might say, "Oh, see, I told you that doesn't work."
Yep.
Today, I could dude, my 31-year sober anniversary is coming up in a few weeks. I could announce to the world that I am going to relapse on my birthday, and do it live on, friggin' Instagram. And of course, I wouldn't do it. I think it'd be a great conversation though. But anyway, that aside, even if I did that, it wouldn't affect AA in the slightest. It's not. AA it's a huge entity. It does, as the saying goes, work if you work it. It just simply isn't for everybody. I tell people all the time, and not to get off track,
Hmm.
with exercise is another great example. Like they'll tell me AA doesn't work. I'm like, look, I understand that, there's things about it that might be difficult. Maybe it's not a great fit for you. But when you walk in the gym and you look at the dumbbells and then you walk back out, do you say, yeah, I went to the gym, but that shit doesn't work.
Love
It
it.
doesn't work.
Spot
I'm
on.
like,
Spot
it
on.
works.
Yes.
Trust me. Trust
Hmm.
me, it works. But you have to go in there and you have to do the work.
Love
But
it.
for me back in the day, and I'll tell you a story that you don't know from the Sahara Desert.
Yeah.
And for those people listening, along with the two friends of mine, we ran about almost 5,000 miles across the Sahara, 6 African countries, 2 marathons every day almost for 111 days in a row,
Jeez.
and 140-degree ground temperatures for the first month. It was, it
Mm.
was brutal, and it was, it sounds almost stupid to say it was harder than I thought it would be, but
Man.
it was. There were a couple of instances, one that you mentioned, this little boy that we found in the desert. And I mean, look, this is one of these out of context things in a way, because we just came across this little boy whose parents had to go 3 days to get water. They went 3 days away and they come back. This 7-year-old little boy, to be honest, he's grown up in the desert.
Yeah.
He's more afraid of us than
Yeah.
he is of being alone.
Yeah.
Right. We're trying to communicate and using our support team, which are native Tuaregs, which are Berbers, and they're native to the Sahara Desert. They've lived there for, millennia. and we're trying to understand a little more about what's going on, have compassion, but also not interfere.
Yeah.
But it just felt crazy to just keep going and pass this little boy. So, that we did the one thing that we could do. We gave him a boatload of water, bottles, things that we at least had, and made us feel good about ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
frankly, because that's about all we could do.
Jeez.
But that is the definition of, at least in that moment, of powerlessness, which we talk about in recovery all the time. Like, I
100%.
was I was powerless in that situation. Like, I could have made it way worse by trying to, like, what are we gonna do? Take the
Take
kid
it
and
with you.
take him?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that would have made things way worse. The other story I'll tell, by the way, too, for your listeners, we went on to I co-founded a clean water nonprofit with Matt Damon that today is called water.org, and it's the world's largest clean water nonprofit.
So awesome, Charlie.
We've raised more than $1 billion, and it all started from just this stupid idea, really, that we could run across the Sahara Desert and it would have some kind of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
But
Jeez.
one more quick story. So
Please.
I'm about halfway through the expedition, and you saw the film, and anybody who wants to see the film, it's still on iTunes. You can get it for like $3 on iTunes, Running
Mm-hmm.
the Sahara. Well, I'm not always the nicest guy in the film. So I am the taskmaster, I'm the villain, and I'm the hero.
Yeah.
Like, I'm kind of all these things into one.
Mm-hmm.
For someone like you, I'm like the hero. For someone who has a problem with authority figures, or you know I get things done. And
For
so
sure.
I don't always do it gracefully, but in any situation, someone, I don't care if it's a business, if it's a life and death situation, if it's an expedition, somebody has to say eventually, shut up, put your shoes on, and let's go.
That's a coach.
And
That's a coach.
yeah,
And I love it because you have to be, because if not, you'd still be out there. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Like, we gotta go. So I love the fact you can see that.
we got nothing to talk about otherwise.
Yeah.
And so about halfway through, though, a new camera guy came, and this was very shortly after I'd had a meltdown. I yelled at somebody. I like ripped off my shirt and threw it on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and like I just, you know, whether I was right or not is not the point. I was made an ass of myself because I was out of control. Well, it had been 50 days, 60 days since I'd been to a meeting or even talked to somebody in sobriety.
Yeah.
I had other issues out there with members of my crew, not my teammates,
Mm-hmm.
but my crew, who actually had substance use issues of their own that were actively happening while we're in the desert.
Yeah. Oh man.
People self-medicating with pills. And anyway, I was going through a lot, and because I was running 50 miles every day, I had no buffer.
Yeah.
So this new cameraman shows up one day, and he like looks at me, and I said something, and he knew I was in recovery. I didn't know him though. And
Mm-hmm.
he's like, Charlie, you have a lot of compassion for like everybody else out here, but you have no compassion for yourself.
Ooh.
And it hit me hard because I recognized I felt so much pressure to make this whole expedition successful.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and to me, the only success was to get to the other side of the Sahara Desert, no matter what.
Yeah.
That I was making it miserable for myself, and I was occasionally making it miserable for other people. And so just that one sort of message
Mm.
from the universe reminded me to be grateful for the opportunity to be out there suffering every single day. And the rest of my journey was still hard, but it made it a little bit easier.
God, I talked about this with Pam just recently too. Like I told you that we just recorded with her, and I think it's worth even repeating. And my listeners are probably like, okay, Coach, we've heard this story a million times, but for me to even like understand everything we go through, Charlie, we start with something amazing. It's great. Life begins. Hooray! Great story. Every movie starts the same way. Great situation. Then all of a sudden, all the hard crap happens in the middle, right? And then it finishes great. It's every story we've ever read. That's the kind of pattern we want to follow. And so as you're running, and I remember these visuals, and I'm seeing like, you're running to these horizons every day that just never change, right? Once you get to the horizon, it keeps changing until that one day when you're like, dude, there it is. Like, oh my gosh, we're done. Like, that to me is the most amazing thing. And to me, I'm thinking that theory of the gap, we're always kind of in the middle. Like, there had to be times in the middle of that sucker where you're like, what are we doing? Just like recovery, you're hitting those walls. Is this worth it? Like, what's going on? I'm so enamored that you guys could continue that far, that long, that distance, and seriously, like, not give up on the goal, because I talk about this all the time. When you start to line up for a marathon, it's inappropriate to think of the finish line. There's so much that could happen in the middle there that, like, you
Mhm.
don't really focus on that. But to a certain degree, you had to, because it was so bloody far away. How did you not deviate off of the whole thing of like, what the hell with this? I'm done. Like, how in the world did you
Yeah,
guys stay like
man.
that focused for that
Yeah.
amount of time?
It's a perfect question for this format because honestly, on like day 7, we fell apart so tremendously. Like I had both my teammates were on IV drips every day. They're so dehydrated. It's 140-degree ground temperatures. Like one of our support vehicles blew up. Two of my support people, locals, quit, not because of it, it was just too hard.
Mhm.
And like, Hollywood is calling, telling me that they're going to pull the plug on this thing. And I basically took the battery out of the sat phone and I stuffed it down in my backpack and I didn't look at it for a week because I wasn't going to let anybody, pull the plug on this thing. And
Mm.
what I recognize though is that I was so focused on the finish line because I felt a lot of pressure. People had invested money and time and energy and all of those things. But I had lost sight of the fact that the only miles that I could run were the ones right in front of me.
Yeah.
And so I was I mean, it is another version of one day at a time, one step at a time. But I mean, it's really true. Like in running that far, 12 hours every day, 50 miles every day, like the only miles I could run were the ones right in front of me. So I focused incrementally. I focused on running a marathon in the morning. I took a little break for lunch for an hour and a half, and then I focused on running a second marathon in the afternoon. And when the day was over, I put my little thin mat down on the ground and I had to sleep until 4 o'clock in the morning. And I got up and I did it again. And the only thing I thought about was that day, those miles right in front of me. Because anything beyond that was
Beautiful.
overwhelming. I mean, when you're standing,
Sahara Desert. Yeah.
when you feel terrible and destroyed,
Yeah.
and you've still got 4,000 miles to run,
4,000
like,
miles.
it's
Oh,
yeah, it's
Charlie.
beyond anything. And I'll tell you another interesting story
Mm.
though. When we finished, the first interview I did was with a correspondent on NPR. And she called, and it was like an hour after we were done. And like she's asking me a few questions, and she finally just said, "So, I mean, how does it feel? Like, how does it feel? Like I'm very emotional and everything else, but how does it really feel to be done, to have done this?" And I didn't plan this. I couldn't plan it.
Mm.
I actually said to her, I said, "You know what? It's incredibly sad."
Ah,
And like, I
real.
didn't mean to say it, but it was an honest answer because yeah, sure. I was relieved. I was whatever, but like people always expect when you get to the finish line of something, that's going to be the time you celebrate and that's the pinnacle. And
Yeah.
sure, it feels good to do it, but once again, it is the journey that matters. And I actually understood in that moment when that was over that this experience was pivotal in my life and I would never be able to recapture it again. It was
Mm-mm.
now done. I could turn around and run the other direction and it wouldn't be the same.
No.
And so there was a great sadness to the recognition that this thing was over. And I think most of us can relate to that. Whether it's your education or an event or a goal of some kind, some big goal, whatever it is, being finished with it,
Yeah.
even successfully, is not the payoff.
Hmm.
The payoff comes every single day along the way.
I think that can actually, I'm so glad you said that, 'cause I think that could actually hold true for the end of your addiction too, because we've got to remember that there were some good fun times and experiences and stuff that we had there
Oh
too.
yeah,
Because when we walk away from that and we're like, goodbye, addiction, it's like losing a loved one too. It's like, I'm leaving you behind. And I don't think people give that stuff enough credit either, Charlie. I know I don't want to romanticize it, but you know what I'm talking about. It's like this thing that's kept me kind of like, functioning for this long, I've got to now walk away from because there's something else coming. Like you said, you could never do that again and have the same feeling. It'd be like, in fact, I'll bet you, and then I don't want to quote you, but if you tried, I don't know if you'd make it this time because you've
totally.
you've done it.
I
And
didn't.
what's the
Yeah,
point, right? I mean, do you think
yeah.
you'd make it if you?
I need to go do other things, and I mean, I do
There you
still
go.
have big projects in the works. But you make such a good point. I wouldn't be alive, and I say this regularly. Alcohol and cocaine specifically, but
Hmm.
almost any drug. Alcohol and drugs saved my life.
Me too, Charlie. 100. I will preach that to the day I
Yeah.
die. Absolutely. Continue.
Yeah, because I had, like most of us, I had trauma. I had all these things and I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't know how to deal with them. I didn't have parents that were able to help me deal with them. I didn't have any tools in
Hmm.
the toolbox. And drinking and drugs allowed me to take that pressure off. Sure, it made a mess of other things.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I didn't show up for people. I was unreliable all the time, and if I did show up half the time, people were sorry because I was wasted
Yeah,
or
man.
whatever, all the things that we
Hmm.
already know. But the fact of the matter is, if I hadn't had that ability to take that pressure valve and release some pressure until I got to the day where I'm like, okay, this has to change, that day that we all know. If I hadn't had that, I would have killed myself or I would have died in some other ugly way, or I'd just be, still drinking. I
Hmm.
mean, frankly, I'd be like it allowed me. I always say I'm grateful for drugs because I did drugs to such a degree that I wasn't going to survive it. And so it sped up my process a little bit. And
Yeah,
I think that happens to a lot of
I
people,
agree.
whereas if I had, I don't mean to say just kept drinking, I probably could have drank for 20 or 30 years of miserable years. And maybe I'd be sitting here at 60, you know, just finally trying to wrap my head around it. So I'm very grateful to drugs. I say a thank you to, drugs all the time because otherwise I probably wouldn't be sitting here now.
I'm with you. Same way. A lot of trauma, a lot of dysfunction. Mother married at 14, kid having kids. So it's like we went through some hell. And I'm
Yeah.
with you. If I wouldn't have had those outlets, I probably would have chose the other option, which was 6 feet under. So I get where you're
Yeah.
coming from. But this is the thing, right? Is now you're out there doing these runs, these events, you're starting to feel this change. And some people may say you were out there for that long. That means you were away from your family and you're away from all these people, and you were,
Mhm.
but that's not that's missing the bigger picture here. Is that now the support system's different? I'm curious. How did your loved ones kind of rally around you to say, you know what, we know this is important and we know this is a big thing, because you've heard the same thing I've heard, and I remember talking to David Clark about this till we were both blue in the face about how the naysayers will come out and say you're just switching addictions, and like,
Yeah.
yeah, but no, not even close. Like, how do
Mm.
you approach that mindset of like, I'm not neglecting things, I'm taking care of
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, well, you picked the one topic right there that always, I fight against,
Me too.
and um first of all, the easiest thing to be in the world is a critic.
Here, here.
And, there is always someone out there that, I mean, I remember back when I got sober, and I had people coming to me from my drinking and using life saying, oh, and I mean family members and close friends saying, dude,
Yes.
you don't need to slow down. I mean, you don't need to quit. You just need to slow down
Yep.
some. I'm like, what are you talking about? Have you been watching me for these years? Like, I can't slow down. And what I recognized was that those critics, what they were worried about was how my sobriety was going to affect them.
Yeah.
How is me improving my life and moving ahead in the world how is that going to affect that? How's it going to make them feel? And so I call them anchors. And so those anchors want to just keep, they want to pull you back because misery loves company.
Mm,
They want to pull you back into into their world. I unhook those anchors. I mean, some I didn't do it correctly, but most I did. And I
sure.
just said, I love you, clip, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'll see you down the road. And sure enough, all those people are either dead or they came to me and years later and said, "Hey, I'm finally ready to make a change. Can you help me?"
Dang.
And look, as far as switching addictions, I got to tell you this, I've never sold my car to enter a marathon or, pawned my computer or whatever.
Yeah.
Did I did I spend a lot of time away from my boys on adventures? My two sons, they're grown adults now. We've talked about this, and
Mm,
100% I admit that they will say and have said in the past, we wish you were, some of those times we wish you were just around more. And I freely admit that that is part of it. But what I also tell them and what I remind everyone else is your responsibility as a parent is to set an example for living a full, passionate, important to you life, a
yeah.
fulfilling life. It's not to be there every minute of your child's life.
Yeah.
So, and just hear me out. Like, for 10 years in a row, I took my young boys to Yosemite and we went on a trip. And like, even after I divorced their mom, long after I divorced their mom. And by the way, I love their mother. We're still great friends,
Hmm.
best divorce ever. But I got married when I was an addict,
Yeah.
and she grew up in a household with a father who was an alcoholic. So she was used to my brand of craziness.
Yeah.
Well, when I finally quit, the irony is that's what led to the divorce,
Yeah.
not my drinking and drug use, but my
Interesting.
not drinking and drug use, because all of a sudden I didn't need a caretaker anymore. I wanted to go do these things. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
my kids, what's ironic now, my kids are 28 and 31, and I never pushed athletics or whatever on them. But my younger son went into the Peace Corps in Senegal.
Wow.
My older son is a personal trainer. They ride bike, they live together in Raleigh, just down the road, and they ride bikes together every single day. And they're very serious about their fitness. My older son is recovering. I mean, he was, even growing up in a sober household, he became a heroin and fentanyl addict.
Hmm.
And you can't stop that stuff.
No.
I don't care who you are. People got to go through what they're going to go through.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, but this is
so
the
anyway,
thing though, is that now you have the tools and understanding on how to support that too and be like, "Son, you know, you're gonna have to run this marathon. I can't run it for you, but I can kind of coach you on how I did it." And that's the beauty of it. I think that's why we have to go through some of these things, man. Like, running through the Sahara, no one thought it was possible until you did it. Raising a kid that might struggle with addiction. Well, guess what? You have the tools now. You can help coach. And there's so many of these things that come back around and come into play because if you wouldn't have done any of that stuff, if you would have looked at your shoes that day after all that arrest and your car getting searched and been like, nah, I'm gonna kick him off and watch the game today, it'd be a completely different situation. So
yeah,
everything we go through is a necessary step for what comes next. And I think it's a beautiful thing, man. And I love that. I love that analogy. I think you are absolutely spot on. But it's taken you to more places. I mean, Brazil, running down there in Brazil and doing all these things.
yeah.
You've seen and your feet have connected with a lot of different grounds around this ball of mud. I'm curious, like, what are some of the stuff that you still kind of let go of? Because I'm a firm believer, and I saw this when I started running. I'm like, wait a minute, as I'm running with my clients, my training these athletes, and I'm their therapist, and all of a sudden they're telling me all these stories about their trauma and stuff as we're running. Why don't you tell me
Yeah,
in my awesome office where no one can hear? It's
yeah,
it's called EMDR therapy, and I didn't know what it was until I got trained in it. It's processing trauma from frontal lobe into long-term memory. And as you're running, you're letting that stuff go. It's behind you. You can go pick it up if you want, but it's way back there. I'm curious, what runs have you done where you've started maybe a little bit tense, but have had kind of like a spiritual awakening throughout, like just like this, like, wow, I left it all out there. Like, 'Cause I think it's a good thing. We build this stuff up, we move, we walk, we run, we work out, we ride, we do whatever, and we leave it behind, and we can be that empty vessel again to take on what's coming next. What's been an event that you've kind of been like, maybe even changed from the start line to the finish
Yeah.
line where you're just like, "Whew, I needed that."
Yeah. There's a couple of them that come to mind. I love everything that you just said, and I do wanna say too that, man, yeah, it is a way to change yourself through physical movement. When I speak to my therapist, you know, when I do, we don't live in the same place. We actually agreed a long time ago that we would both do it on the move. So we both go for a walk in our respective
Love
locations,
it.
and the processing, the way I'm able to access what I'm feeling, what I want to say, like all of that is so much more on the surface than going to sit in someone's office on their sofa
Mhm.
and try to dig into this stuff. So, I always say that physical, it's why, sorry, I know I'm going to get off
You're
track, but
fine.
in rehabs, and I work with rehabs around the country, and one of my first questions is, what is your requirement for physical movement? Like, what do you require out of your patients in rehab? Pretty much all of them say it's voluntary. I'm like, come on, man. Your one-on-one therapy, your group therapies, all these other things, are those voluntary? And they're like, no, they have to go. I'm like, so the one thing that you can control, I mean, because if someone's been out there for a long time and they come to rehab, their body's a disaster, they're mush. And the one thing that they can do that will make them feel better immediately is just to go for a 20-minute walk
Yeah.
or go do something to move their body
Mhm.
instead of sitting them in a chair. I'm not saying you can't do both, but don't just sit them in a chair and like do start talk therapy on day one without also making them move their body. So,
100%.
but for me, I would say bad water is the answer that comes to mind. And
Dude,
look, I
yeah.
I have run across, and I don't mean in. I've literally run across like 40 countries in my life. So, I've seen places, I've gone places, I've interacted with people, and I am dude, I don't even like running all that much.
Me either, man, but we do it, don't we?
But
Yeah.
what's funny is, but I'm a cultural explorer. Like, for me, if
Ah,
I'm going to go to Brazil and I'm going to do an event, I don't want to go to Brazil as a tourist. I want to go to Brazil and I want to go through all on foot, all the little villages, and I want to meet the people and I want to eat the food and I want to see the mountains and the jungles, and I want to experience the heat. I want to feel it. I want to know all this personally, not from seeing it on TV or from hearing about it from somebody else. And I think that that is irreplaceable. But Badwater,
mm,
the reason I love Badwater is I've done it a bunch of times over a long period of time.
yeah,
The course doesn't really change. Every couple of years something happens and they have to make a change. But
yeah.
like the course, generally speaking, it's Death Valley in the second week of July. It's freaking hot.
Brutal.
And it's 135 miles, right? And I know this pain intimately.
Yeah.
Like, I know ignorance is bliss. The first time I did that race, I had no idea. And like, I had this sort of joyful, interesting experience. Well, then you go back and you know how bad it's going to suck. And so, I think that for my recovery, though, being able to go there time and time again, knowing, and I've gone to that race usually with the goal of doing really well in the race. And like, I guess I've been top 5 like 5 times there. So, I've done better at
Incredible.
that race. I do better at that race actually than my actual skill level, because I'm a good runner, but what I really am is a freaking stubborn human being that's too stupid to quit.
Love it.
And so it serves me very well in the hardest events, because you and I and everybody listening to this, we've already been through stuff that's way harder than that.
Thank you. Yeah, I preach
Way
this all the
harder.
time. It's true. The pain that we felt during addiction doesn't compare to the pain at mile, 85 as you're going up
Oh
Towns
no.
Pass, whatever. Like that stuff hurts, but not as bad
Yeah.
as you've been in the back of that cop car watching them search your car, right?
Oh yeah.
Love it.
Well, that demoralizing, I always go right back to that. I call it the day after. The drugs are gone, the booze is gone, you've emptied the bank account, you've disappointed people, and you're in that physical depression and emotional depression that makes you want to die.
Yeah,
And like
man.
there is no I take myself right back to that spot. Anytime that I need to be reminded about the fact that, life can be difficult, I go right back to that place in my head and I see myself sitting there and I have a conversation with that guy and then I give, thanks for the fact that I'm actually out here doing something hard.
So when you're like overheating and you're like dying, you're like, I could have been
Yeah.
there, right? And so
Yeah.
I'd much rather choose this than that.
Yeah.
Scarcity versus
And
freedom. Hmm.
And look, dude, the only thing we ever remember, and I tell people this all the time. I mean, I still run 100 milers and I do it for one reason. I know at some point, probably at several points during this race, because there's no such thing as an easy 100 miler. Like it doesn't exist.
No,
Just like there's no such thing as an easy marathon, really.
no.
I mean, 26 miles is still a long way to run. And if you're trying to go fast, it actually really hurts.
Yeah.
So I know that at some point I'm going to want to quit. That's just natural. Like or I'm at least standing there going, "Why? What is wrong with me? Like why
Self-preservation. Hmm.
right, why did I think this is a good idea?
I
I've done
paid
this
for
dozens
this.
of times.
Hmm.
It always sucks, and why am I doing it again?" But that is actually the moment that I care about because when I get to that place where I can't possibly go on, then my experience kicks in. And I know actually that if I eat something, if I drink something, maybe I walk for a few minutes, I actually know that my pain is going to go from a 10 to an 8. And that is going to make all the difference.
Yes.
And so rather than quitting, and later on when I'm telling the story of the race or whatever, I don't even remember the first 50 miles or the first what I don't even remember it because if it was easy, just like in life, we don't remember the easy stuff.
Mm-mm.
What we remember are those moments when everything falls apart and who you are is clear to yourself, it's clear to other people around you. What more could you want? And that's why you and I agree so much
Yeah.
on physical movement because life is going to bring a bunch of BS to your doorstep.
Yep.
It's going to bring hard times that are involuntary. Well, the more often you've put yourself in a place where you test yourself physically, you can enter a marathon and you can quit. You can walk off the course. It's not life or death, right? You can stop doing the workout. You can commit to doing 100 burpees and only make it to 50 and you can quit. Like you can do all those things and it's not life or death. But if you can push through in that moment when you don't want to do it anymore and you can get to the end, that lesson translates to all the other parts of your life. The day that you want to relapse, the day that you want to quit your job or leave your marriage or whatever. It doesn't mean those things might not happen in the future, but you can learn to not make a big decision at a low moment
Love it.
and just let that moment pass by because it will pass by and a little bit later you'll feel better and you won't make that terrible decision that might impact the rest of your life.
Man.
You'll at least make it with a clear head.
Charlie, I'm like thinking, why the hell is it taking us so long to talk? Because I love what you're saying. You are, I mean, you are saying everything that I truly believe in. Even right down to you, like you said, you want to be immersed in it. Like, the whole feeling of the experience. Like I said, the foot on the ground, watching the Sahara run, and you guys run through those towns, and the kids come out, and you can see all you guys perk up because you're like, people, something here, and it's that energy, and then all of a sudden you're like back out there in the dark and you start living
Yeah.
for those moments. Those are moments that you cannot ever just create in addiction. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. We
Mhm.
think it does. We think that using and it's going to heighten the experience. I remember working with a kid once who I'm like, he's like, I'm going snowboarding this weekend, and it's the first time I'm going snowboarding, like sober. And I'm like, I want
Mm.
you to just be present, man. He comes back to me, Charlie, the next day to come, or Monday to come into therapy, and he's like in tears. I mean, it's a 16-year-old kid. The 16-year-olds don't cry. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how was it? Because we'd gone through all this stuff. And he's like,
Mhm.
I didn't realize, like, I could smell pine trees up there. He's like, I didn't realize like the rainbows that flash off of the ice. And he's like, and he went through this like very eclectic kind of like out of body experience simply because he was aware. And I was like, that's it, brother. That's what we want. You can't get high or drunk and think you're going to create a masterpiece. That's in your head until you read it when you're sober. I was
Yeah.
like blown away. So I love the fact that you, even at Badwater, can get down into that. I can feel again. We don't need to run away from our feelings, right? We live in a world where we want extra strength Tylenol and maximum strength bear so that we want pain gone now. Pain's a
Yeah.
good indicator, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it teaches us something. And you've been through it. You've been through lots of pain. What have you learned as a result of it?
Man, first of all, appreciate first experiences, because it's a belief of mine that we kind of spend our lives chasing firsts,
Yeah.
because you said it a moment ago, like especially with drugs and alcohol, like we had some in those early days when our bodies were pure, and we got some real relief from doing those things, and then we kind of spend the rest of our lives trying to chase those early feelings. The same things happens with jobs and relationships and having sex and like whatever it is, like we want it to feel that way, and it's impossible to recreate because what you don't have is sort of the mix of fear that goes along with it.
Yeah.
And so what I love to say is that's why I rarely Badwater is an exception, partly because I'm always afraid of bad water. Like
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I do it. Like I don't ever step up to the line at Badwater with like ridiculous confidence because it's going to kick my ass. I
Yes.
know that. But it's also why I like to go do like I want to go do other things. I want to try other things. I want to kayak, I want to mountain bike, I want to row, I want to skydive. I want to do these things because what I love, and I freely admit that I chase this feeling to a certain degree. I love the feeling of standing there 30 seconds before I'm getting ready to start this new thing and being terrified.
You're right. You're right.
Cuz
You're right.
back when part of what I loved about the using life, I loved driving around the streets, looking for dope or doing the thing. I loved it because it was terrifying. And
Mhm.
part of me I thought when I got sober, my life was just going to freaking be boring. And because it wasn't just the drugs and alcohol, the
Yeah.
acquisition of the drugs was actually like, we all know that
The
craziness where
chase. Mhm.
the chase, and like, but with that goes a lot of kind of like excitement. You practically feel like you're a spy, and like
Yeah, man.
there's all this ridiculous mental stuff that's going on. Well, how do you recreate that? Well, part of the way you recreate it without the drugs and alcohol is by doing things that test your limits,
Mhm.
physically in particular, but
Yeah.
it could be starting a business or, you know, going on a date. It could be lots of things, but like appreciating the value of first experiences without only focusing on the finish.
Yeah.
And like a lot of people want to run a marathon, but they get so caught up with all they want to do is get to the finish line and get the
Get that
medal.
medal.
That's not where the good stuff is.
No. No. No.
The good stuff is in all the preparation, and Pam Rickard obviously says the same thing, and you say the same thing. The preparation, the daily showing up and putting in the work, is deeply satisfying to me,
Mhm.
And look, man, I encourage people. I've fallen into the world of cold plunge and things like that,
Mhm.
and I love these different things. But what I love about them actually is it gives me a new. I freaking hate the cold. I am not a cold
You and me are
weather
a lot
person.
alike. I don't like running as much, and I don't like the cold, but we do it because, again, we're chasing first. I think that's a
Exactly.
name for for our next documentary, brother. We're
There
gonna
we go.
start chasing some firsts. I think that's a
That's
genius
it.
thing because you're right. When you say
Yeah.
recreate, right? We want to recreate the first. That's where the term recreate comes from. It's recreating by
There you go.
recreating something new. And so that's exactly what, listeners, you're getting gold from Charlie here, because he's speaking the language of, like, in order to do it, you gotta move. You cannot stay set.
Yeah.
Our bodies aren't designed for that. And it's gonna be scary and it's gonna be hard, but it's gonna be flipping amazing. Don't you think, brother?
It is. It's gonna be amazing, and commit to those tiny things, man. Don't put the pressure on yourself that you have to, like, conquer the world.
Mm.
Like, commit to, just like with me with my cold plunge. Like, if I commit, I say, okay, I'm going to do this every day for 30 days, no matter what,
Yeah.
no matter what's going on. And if I'm traveling, I'll do a cold shower, like whatever, but I'm committed to this thing. And like, there's no reason for me not to do it. And just how does that help my business? How does it help I don't know, but what I know is that the value of making a commitment and following through on it. These incremental changes happen internally for me. Even after 30 years sober, I'm still looking for new ways to make that happen.
Yeah, brother, man. See, I told you the hour goes by fast, brother. Like
Yeah,
there's still probably like 28 hours of content I need to talk to you about. That's why we can't make
we
this
could
the
do it
last
again.
one. I know the listeners are going to want more of you, but thank you so much, man. Like everything you've said today has just been spot on, and I do appreciate you for, stepping out there, because again, you may not know, but you are a pioneer in this, and it was because of a lot of what you did and the sacrifices you made that inspired some of the folks I was trying to catch that bug with, and it worked, Charlie. And so, thank you
Yeah,
so much for
thank you.
just stepping up, man, and like, being genuine and authentic, and putting in the work, because that's what it requires. How do people get in touch? I mean, I'm curious. You got social medias. I mean, like you said, you and I are kind of like social media, like bingers and
Easy.
purgers, but like,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, but it's easy. My website, which is just charlieengle.com, like if you dig into contact on there, that's my phone number, it's my email address. I answer everything.
love
So
it.
if somebody wants to, reach out, there's a lot of other information on the website. If somebody wants to, get a signed book or they want something like that, then just reach out and do it with me directly. And the social media handles are on there too. So if you like social, don't be disappointed by my lack of posting. But
You're here.
if I'm off doing something, I'll post about it. I'm not a great everyday sort of a poster,
You don't
but
post your
like
food and stuff, and like,
once in a while. And we didn't even get to that. I mean, I am
see?
vegan. I've been vegan for a very long time, and like there's other things that people will probably find curious, but
I'm telling you. I see, that's
and
what I'm saying. We only scratched the surface. And it's
hey
the
man,
thing, your
let's
books, you're an author, you're an ultra runner, you're a business. I mean, there's so
let's do
many
it
things,
again, man.
brother. This is
Let's
why,
just do it again.
again,
So
listeners, this is why I want you to pay attention. People in recovery, right? When we woke up in the morning and we had no means or no money or no ability to get high, at the end of the day, we got it. Those same principles flipped script can make you an incredible person in recovery to do things that you don't think is possible, simply because you have that tenacity inside. Again, yeah, you're right. We're gonna have to do this again, because this is like part one, right? Chasing first, part one.
yeah,
Um,
there we go.
but thanks, brother. Listeners, you've been well fed. Please, jump on. We'll link Charlie's socials and website onto the episode show notes and whatnot. But please reach out, check out this. We're gonna post links to the Runnings of Sahara, because I think it's a beautiful documentary, and you can kind of see how Addict to Athlete's philosophy and message kind of got started when these three gentlemen started their event. I mean, that's just incredible to me. It's been a pleasure, brother. Athletes, until next time, continue to turn your mess into your message.